Thank you. Anna.
Thank you. Could I ask, firstly, Therese, the Joint Nature Conservation Committee last week reported that the UK is progressing at an insufficient rate towards many of the Aichi biodiversity targets. And we know that biodiversity loss is accelerating rapidly, species becoming extinct at a rate that hasn't been seen since the last global mass extinction. Could you tell us why the government isn't doing more to halt this biodiversity loss?
Well, I think we assess 19 out of the 20 targets. There's one on indigenous populations, which we don't believe is relevant. And 5 of those, JNCC has done their assessment and said we're absolutely on track to achieve that. And on the 14, there was progress to be made. Now, the targets I've often found in the past can be somewhat nebulous, but if I give you an example, just even of target 1, about getting the public to understand more about biodiversity. When I went to CBD COP last year, just talking with other countries and with the Secretary-General, just the name biodiversity is actually puts up barriers to people on what does that really mean. So there are things that we could do about perhaps changing it to nature, Convention for the Conservation of Nature. But there are activities we are undertaking, like the Year of Green Action, in a way to try and stimulate interest. There's a lot more interest coming in now into the biodiversity. So if I think about species, yes, there are some species under threat, but we are using different policies, in particular through the Countryside Stewardship Scheme, but also our work in overseas territories. And a good example will be something like the horseshoe bat, a very special little creature. Most humans don't seem to want bats anywhere near them and under persecution. But also, they're very reliant on certain kinds of insects. And so Natural England have worked with various farmers to increase grazing, because that increases dung. Insects go around dung, and the horseshoe bats, if that's near their roosts, they prosper. So we're seeing, in a way, strategies and policies being undertaken that are species-specific. Nevertheless, I'm very conscious that things like farmland birds are in decline, but I believe there's a huge opportunity. It's a bit like Target 3. CAP reform that's happened so far, European Court of Auditors has basically said Pillar 2 is more or less greenwashing. We are undertaking a huge revolution with environmental land management and the future British CAP, or English CAP, it depends on what the other countries want to do, that will dramatically change on its heads the proactivity of the investment going into environment first, so paying for eco-services. For me, that is a massive change and something that we can really make a difference to in the future.
Okay, so you're saying they've got it wrong?
No, I didn't say that at all. I'm just saying that...
You're saying you're doing enough at the moment anyway?
I'm saying that we are taking action which is turning around some of what the JNCC recognises, that CAP reform has only gone so far in terms of what that means in terms of managed land, or indeed the CFP. CFP has made some good progress in terms of sustainable yields, but there's more that we can do. There's another target, for example, where we've recognised ourselves that about working with businesses. We believe that there's more we can do on resource efficiency in the circular economy. So the JNCC has said, well, you've said there's more you can do, so you're making progress, but you've set yourself this other target. We're not going to achieve that in the next 12 months. So it's those sorts of things where there is a recognition, absolutely. But I do believe that as we go forward, we're planning to update our nature strategy in 2020, which will then be aligned with the CBD targets for 2030, which will be agreed in Beijing. And I genuinely hope that the world can come together with something a bit more concrete than we have. That's perhaps not the right phrase when you're talking about nature, but you know what I mean. Firmer in how we actually make progress on this and linking it in with the SDGs as well. So 2020 is going to be a very special year for the environment and climate, and I believe that we can make good progress on some of these.
There is a risk of this all just being rhetoric, because you've been very good at rhetoric on the world platforms, talking about the UK being a leader in this, and quite clearly from the report last week you're not.
Well, I think it's
about managing those expectations and actually being realistic in what you're doing.
Well, as I've pointed out, the JNCC themselves said if we hadn't mentioned in our 25-year environment plan that we want to do more in the rest of the world, or that we'd put out our resources and waste strategy, which focuses on improving circular economy, then we ourselves, they said they can't make us saying we're going to hit the targets if we ourselves are saying that. So it's not we're trying to duck anything, it's not we're trying to hide anything. We are very proactive, in particular on our invasive species, challenging that, not only in this country but in overseas territories. And quite a lot of our international aid is now being deployed increasingly to try and help the natural environment in other parts of the world too.
Changes in land use and climate change, as you mentioned, are all major causes of biodiversity loss. What's being done outside of DEFRA to meet those challenges?
What's from Mr. Morehouse?
Yeah.
From Mr. Marion on that.
Mr. Malthouse.
So we're dead keen on trying to improve the country's biodiversity in any way that we can. And as you might have seen, we've been consulting on the concept of biodiversity net gain. And the idea is that, if subject to that consultation coming back, we'll then mandate that in the upcoming Environment Bill. There's definitely an enormous amount that we can do, and I've been in conversation with a variety of organisations, from the Wildlife Trust to the Woodland Trust, about what more we can embed in the planning system generally. So we will be also bringing out planning guidance in the next 2 or 3 months, hopefully, around the MPPF and what local authorities should be looking for and should be interpreting in planning to provide, effectively, as Therese said, space for nature in new developments and generally across the piece. One of the things that we struggle with slightly, which I'm just, is in my mind as we try and devise both of these things, is that nature has a habit of being unpredictable and kind of moving around. And what we've got to try and get away from is a sort of checklist approach. Particularly the large developers and local authorities, to a certain extent, like to have a kind of checklist approach to the natural world. Right? We put in a few silver birches and we've kind of satisfied our requirement for biodiversity. Whereas in fact, what it needs is something that's a little bit more creative and a little bit of more curation over time. So we're just putting some thought into how we could manufacture that into, as I say, the regulatory framework which we produce to enable space for nature in our towns and cities.
Looking at what outcomes are going to come from whatever changes you're going to be making in regulation.
So that's the issue, right? Because the outcome is uncertain. You're never quite sure. So I've had swift boxes on my house now for 4 years, and they remain unused. Now, and I'm hopeful that bird will appear, as it always does, on May the 5th, and we'll start to use them. You can put up as many swift boxes, and I also have, strangely, a bat box on the house. I'm quite keen to live with bats. But whether nature meets you halfway is unpredictable. And the point is that this has to be a constant curation, if you like, of the environment in which we live, to adapt and change and attract and deal with some of those changing things. And that's quite difficult for us to produce in a regulatory environment.